Hello, everyone. It is January 22nd, 2025. Chip, Ohio State did what most people kind of expected them to do, which is win the national championship game against Notre Dame. And it was fairly convincing. It got dicey. It got a little dicey in the fourth quarter, but a fairly convincing win for the Buckeyes. They cover the spread. If you had money on the spread in this game, you went on quite a roller coaster ride. From Ohio State being way out in front to Notre Dame coming back and getting underneath the spread to then the late Ohio State field goal to push Ohio State back over to cover. So hopefully everyone survived that. I did not partake, so I was fine. But Chip, major takeaways from the game, roughly, I think what we expected in terms of margin of victory of, 8 to 10 points, I think was what we had said. I think you said like 10, maybe 10. I had 8, ended up being 11. I guess, how do you process that and just how much of that late game stuff was Notre Dame was Ohio State trying to get the trophy presentation to start a little bit early, or how did you view that?
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, incidentally, I had the 11, but not the final score. Like I kind of anticipated it being a close game, and then Ohio State scoring a touchdown late to make it like 28-17. So I want to give credit to Notre Dame. I mean, it was, I can't just say it any other word. It was looking rather bleak for Notre Dame at one point. Like I thought, all right, the possibility of Ohio State completely destroying them looked very possible in the second half. So credit to Marcus Freeman and his coaching staff and the players on that team for battling back. Like you said, kind of got dicey, but on a personal note, I never, ever felt like, okay, this was going to, like Ohio State was going to blow it. I kind of, getting back to your question, Mark, I thought it was a significant combination of Notre Dame with that they truly did battle back. And some of the penalties that Ohio State, the pass interference specifically, I realize it sounds, like I have like a vendetta against Davis and Igbinosun, but I mean, it was just, oh my gosh, like some of the pass interference calls that kept Notre Dame drives alive, and Notre Dame capitalized upon that. So that's a good thing. And then I also think Ohio State at the latter portion of the game, it was frustrating, but I also saw the strategy behind it where they basically right before the crucial, I guess in Ohio State lore, will forever be known as third and Jeremiah, that the first couple plays of that drive that Ohio State was basically looking to try and get Notre Dame to burn timeouts, to try and burn up time. And so, yeah, would it have been a horrible thing if Ohio State had to possibly punt? Not necessarily. I think that they had a pretty good handle on the situation. In post game, Chip Kelly said that he had given very specific instructions to Will Howard about, okay, if they're playing zone, I want you to go on a shorter route. If they're going man, to hit Jeremiah, which obviously we all saw that he did. So tremendous game. I think the ratings came out before we started recording. I saw that it was a ratings bonanza. I will still always argue to anyone that the ratings would have been better on a Friday or Saturday night. I don't care what anyone says. The fact that you had two phenomenal teams on a Monday night when people I realize a lot of people had to wake up and go to work the next day, and not everyone is Ohio State or Notre Dame fan, but I have a feeling that the average college football fan would have preferred to watch that game on a Friday or Saturday night.
Yeah, I think they should move the game to a Friday night, personally. You don't want to mess with the NFL. I get it. So Saturday night kind of takes you out of that with the NFL playing Saturday games later in the season. But there's no reason you can't have it on Friday night. I don't get it. I'm a guy. I think the Super Bowl should start like 2 hours earlier than it does.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm not going to go crazy and say we can't have Super Bowl Sunday anymore. We need to move it to Saturday. But I think the Super Bowl should be more of like a 4 p.m. kickoff and like really a 4 p.m. kickoff, not like messing around and, tee it up at 4:00. And I think that would, I think that's a better sweet spot as well. I mean, you can even lengthen the broadcast doing it that way, and you can have your halftime show at roughly 6:00 or whatever. But yeah, so I'm with you. I think Friday night would be a better approach. It doesn't sound like that's really on the table.
No, unfortunately.
Changes. There's other things that maybe are on the table, but maybe that's a different episode. But yeah, Jaden Greathouse made some unbelievable individual plays as well. Yeah, it was a little bit of both. Ohio State certainly. I don't think Ohio State took their foot off the gas. I think they got a little complacent defensively. Not so much foot off the gas, but just like attention to details maybe slipped a little bit. But I don't think like the intensity necessarily dropped. I mean, Dave Stigmanosin plays with a lot of intensity, and so hats off to Notre Dame, because when Ohio State came out and scored in the second half there, right off the jump, I'm like, oh, this is Tennessee. It's gonna be Tennessee. It's gonna be 42-14 or something like that. It's gonna be really bad, and the Emeka Ibuka fumble certainly helped. And again, that was another thing. Like that was a big play that started it for Notre Dame, was the Ibuka fumble, or else Ohio State scoring at least 3 more, probably another touchdown. And again, that wasn't taking foot off the gas. That was actually a guy trying to continue and fight for extra yardage and make a play. And great play by Notre Dame to punch that out from behind. So, yeah, I think Notre Dame showed a lot of grit, which I think we both thought they would. And I think that's why we didn't pick like the uber blowout that a lot of people were picking, was because I think we did respect Notre Dame's ability to grind out games. So where does this Ohio State team rank, like among the past 5 or 6? You want to go back to like 2019 LSU or something, because there's a lot of ways to kind of dice this one up. On one hand, they didn't even play in their conference championship game. They had 2 regular season losses, including one where they were a 21-point home favorite. On the other hand, first team in history to have 5 AP top 5 wins in a single season. A very dominant run through the playoffs, through a 4-game stretch of playing nothing but great teams. How do you square those two things against each other as you try and put them in historical context?
That's a really good question. I think, I'm obviously the fact that they wound up as national champion, they're going to be at the top of, kind of like the recent teams, but that 2019 team is always going to be the team that's going to be the what if, because for all intents and purposes, when they were playing against Clemson, let's face it, they had the lead. Now, granted, they gave it up. Then there was the controversial non-call at the end of the game that had Ohio State fans justifiably fuming to this day about hey, we should have won that game, and we should have been playing for the national championship. And the thing is that I will always wonder is that 2019 LSU team that eventually did win the national championship, they looked quite formidable. So, I just kind of feel like we were cheated as a college football fan, cheated out of what could have been a tremendous game. But, to your point, I think the fact that, is there a slight blemish on this national championship season as an Ohio State fan? Yeah, because you always want to beat that team up north. You always want to win the Michigan game. I think Chris Carter in the week leading up to the Cotton Bowl versus Texas, and Chris Carter was very vocal in his criticism of Ryan Day after the Michigan loss. I thought he summarized it really well. He said, hey, here's something unique about this Ohio State team. If they win the national championship, which they've done, this will be the first time in Ohio State football history that a national championship has been won without beating Michigan. So that's always gonna be there, I think, as an Ohio State fan. And I realize that it probably makes me sound obsessive. It probably puts me, if not in somewhere close to that lunatic fringe that Kirk Herbstreit described. But I understand the fact that you always want to beat Michigan, but I I'm going to look back on this season with such tremendous pride in Ryan Day and the players and the coaches, based on the fact that, I mean, things looked just so, just impossible to overcome, the feelings of despair and just depression. The afternoon of November 30th, the fact that they were able to block all that noise out. I mean, like, I know that they heard it. Obviously, Ryan Day has made it abundantly clear in his post-game comments about recognizing the pressures that come with Ohio State. His wife had a very emotional and understandable emotional interview that I saw on social media about, when you start hearing about death threats and things like that. I don't think anyone can just say like, oh yeah, like it was no big deal. I mean, it was very taxing, but I will always look back with tremendous pride as an Ohio State fan, in how Ryan Day, the players and the coaches responded, came out, took care of business right from the onset. You were talking about Tennessee a moment ago, and then, the way they went out to the West Coast, handled Oregon. I mean, like, Oregon had no idea what hit them. I mean, just the sheer look of Dan Lanning was looking incredulous as to like what was transpiring on the football field. And then they really slugged it out against really two formidable opponents in Texas and Notre Dame. So that being said, I'm going to put the Ohio State 2024 team number one on the list, obviously, because they completed the task, as Urban Meyer might have said, completed what had to be done in against, like you said, tremendous opposition. But I will always have that 2019 team up there in kind of that what if category.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think their A game. I think their A game is probably the best of Ohio State's three national championship teams. I think it's just so hard. It's just so hard to kind of rank them. Like, there's part of me that's like, oh, what, them versus 2002. And I'm like, there's part of me that thinks there's no way 2002 would not get run off the field. But yet that team just found ways to win that just defied all logic. So it's like, how could you pick them to get blown out by anybody? I mean, they faced arguably the most talented roster of all time that in the championship game and won that game. So I go back and forth. I was asked about this a lot today and this last day or two, like where they stack up. And, the 14 team, Cardale Jones comes in. Ezekiel Elliott has just an epic, like, 3-game run. But, yeah, it's really strange. It's really strange trying to rank them. I do think this team's A game, and I think that's all you can probably do for the most part, is kind of, okay, they all play their best, who wins. And I think the 2024 team at their best beats the other two.
Yeah. I mean, something you just said that kind of made me think of, with the fact that when you compare and contrast this 2024 national championship team to the 2002 and the 2014, they're like the common denominator among all three is just basically, and I apologize to any former players or coaches that might be offended by what I'm about to say, but just basically the improbability of all three. And what I mean by that is that, for example, like after, like just recently here, like I said a few moments ago, on November 30th, it looked like, oh my God, like they're going to get in the playoffs, but Ryan Day, like, he's coaching for his job, and, and they have to win 4, and then they went out and did it. When you think back to 2014, as you just said, the fact that, okay, like Cardale Jones comes in, after, Ohio State at the beginning of the season, when Braxton Miller went down, everyone was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how Ohio State's going to respond. And then JT Barrett was thrust in, and I was in Ohio Stadium when Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech, and everyone was like, oh my God, like they're completely out of it. And then they had to fight and scrape just to, get back into the conversation. And then as I just said a few moments ago, like Cardale Jones came in, and it was improbable the performance he put on. And last and certainly not least, the 2002 team, like it was just like they were snatching, like victory from the jaws of defeat seemingly every week. And it was basically like Jim Tressel, he was as cool as the other side of your pillow, but it was, I mean, like watching that team, like I said on a previous episode, my daughter, she was feeling the nerves against when Ohio State played Texas. And I had to remind her, because she was only an infant at the time. I'm like, trust me, the Texas game, is as difficult as that was nothing compared to what Ohio State fans experienced on a week in, week out basis in 2002.
Yeah, and the last two, like, obviously Tressel was in his second year, and
right.
I think they'd had a really tough 3-year stretch, the worst 3-year stretch, gosh, in program history, in modern, post-World War II. And so I think everyone was just happy that they were nationally relevant again. But the last two have some parallels, and no one's going to admit this now because of what happened from there on out, but they had lost Urban Meyer's championship team. They lose to Virginia Tech at home by 2 touchdowns. And at that point, I think I'd lost 3 out of 4 games because they had went into the Big Ten championship game undefeated and lost to Michigan State and then lost the bowl game. I think that was one of the Clemson losses.
Yeah,
right?
You got it.
Orange Bowl. They come out, and I think it was their second game of the season. They look really bad in a home loss to Virginia Tech. And at that point, a not so a not so insignificant portion of the fan base is like, we got watered down, Urban Meyer. We didn't get Florida killer instinct, Urban Meyer. We got laid back, fat and happy, mellowed down, Urban Meyer. That was the narrative. A lot of people won't admit it now. 1,000% the narrative at that point. And they go on this crazy run with, like a redshirt freshman quarterback who then gets hurt. And then like Cardale Jones just comes out of nowhere. And they go on this crazy run. And so like, I think both the last two, the coaches were under tremendous pressure because it was still early in Meyer's tenure. But like people were like, did we get Florida Urban Meyer? Because they went undefeated his first year with no pressure, they had the sanctions. But then the wheels kind of came off in that Big Ten championship game against Michigan State, and like I said, you lose 3 out of 4, and it's just like, what's going on here? And I think Urban Meyer's job wasn't in danger at that point, but I think there were a lot of people after that Virginia Tech loss were wondering if Urban Meyer was going to have the same type of success in Columbus that he had at Florida at that point. And so then, of course, here with Ryan Day, it's, a similar thing of, a little more serious probably at this point with Day being relatively far into his tenure. But do I think his seat was warm with the administration? No. Do I think the fan base and how angry they were about the whole situation could have changed that and made it an untenable situation this offseason? Yes. So it just things can change so fast is kind of the moral of the story for both of their last 2 championship teams. And so it's interesting. But here's the real question. Is the Big Ten the best conference in college football now? Has the SEC been dethroned after 2 straight years of Big Ten championships, 2 straight years of no SEC teams in the title game? What do we think?
I'm going to say yes. Simply, I mean, it's a what have you done for me lately, world. And I realize that again, like some of our viewers may say, Chip, you don't know what you're talking about, but I'm not the only one that has, those kind of thoughts, like the fact that, you have national people, like say what you will about Colin Cowherd. He's kind of starting to, make those comments. But I mean, you ask me, when I look at how Ohio State not only did against 2 SEC teams, but overall, like let's take Ohio State out of the equation. I mean, it's very easy to sit and I don't want to be one of those guys, since we're talking about, the Big Ten versus the SEC. One of the things that used to irritate me as an Ohio State fan would be like all of the SEC fans that basically seemed very content to ride the coattails of Alabama. So I'm gonna put Ohio State on the back burner here. And then when you compare and contrast the results of, how the Big Ten did in bowl games versus the SEC without Ohio State, the evidence is clear. And that's not to say that, we could be having this conversation on January 22nd, 2026, and the situation could be completely different. But I would say right now, as we conclude the 2024 season officially and start looking forward into 2025, absolutely, I feel that it is very warranted to say that the Big Ten is the preeminent conference in college football today.
If head-to-head matters, they are. Had a great postseason against the SEC. They have the last 2 national championships from 2 different programs and a third team that was number 1 in the country for a massive part of the year and was the number 1 seed in the playoff that didn't win a national championship this year. So I think they are. I think the argument all year was, the SEC might not be as good at the top as it has been in recent years, but the depth of the conference and it's the depth of the Big Ten's terrible. And then Illinois goes out and beats South Carolina, who people wanted in the playoff. And it just, the results on the field, I think are pretty clear to me at this point that the Big Ten has over the last 2 years passed the SEC, and now it's the SEC who's got to reclaim it. Will they do that is interesting because the Big Ten had 3 of the top 5 teams this year in the final AP poll. And if you look at next year's early national championship odds, the Big Ten has 3 of the top 5 teams in national championship odds for next year, with Ohio State leading it. Oregon, I think, is 3rd best odds. And then I think 5th is Penn State. Now, in between there are Georgia and Texas, 2 SEC schools. So, and look, this is the fun part. We're going to have Texas, Ohio State right out of the gates next year.
Yeah,
so we're going to find out early, where, did the offseason change a lot?
Right. I think you hit it on the head a while ago when you said this is going to be kind of, you can't force a rivalry, but the fact that Ohio State, as you just said, Ohio State and Texas, how they begin the 2025 regular season, the fact that they just concluded a really tough physical game that, could have gone either way. I'm obviously happy that it went in Ohio State's favor, but and then the fact that they'll play again in Austin in 2026, that, and we're in a brand new world with this expanded college football playoff with 12 teams, that the possibility of playing Texas, when it comes to, playoff implications, I think is going to be here to stay. The team that I am most interested in, no disrespect to Texas, no disrespect to Georgia when it comes to the national title odds, but I don't want to say that that his seat is warm, but I'm really curious to see how Kalen DeBoer does in year 2 with Alabama, because let's face it, that was an unenviable position for any coach to come into. The fact that Kalen DeBoer came in, that Alabama was okay, that they had an opportunity to make it in the playoffs. They were beaten badly by Oklahoma, which kept them out of the playoffs. All the whining and revisionist history by Kirk Herbstreit about, we weren't trying to campaign for them. Okay, well, we've got the receipts, we've got the video, we've got all the audio of what you said. And then for Michigan to come out with even more players declaring for the NFL draft,
with nobody left on their roster, and with Alabama's guys all playing.
Exactly. And then Michigan, now granted, it wasn't pretty, but they won. That, to me, getting back to my point, is that I think that Alabama has to respond well based on the, I'm not retracting what I just said. It's unenviable, but it's one of these things I think Kalen DeBoer really has to answer the bell in year 2, just to kind of silence the critics that I'm sure are starting to, gather around.
Look, I always said I would never follow. I would have never followed. People are like, they'll get Dabo Swinney after saying, why would Dabo Swinney take that job? Are you nuts? Why would you do that? You want to be the guy who You want to be the guy who follows the guy who follows the guy.
Oh yeah.
You want to let like the guy after Saban like be not as successful, which is obviously going to happen no matter who they hire. And then you get to come in and be like, we're going back. You get to come in and sell the hopes and dreams instead of having to defend yourself constantly against Saban's legacy. I get it. Like big money, great job, top 5 job in the country, big bucks, playing in the SEC, playing these big games all the time. Like I get it, but I'm still like, I think if you're Kalen DeBoer, you should have passed. I think Dobby Swinney obviously did pass. There's no way you could convince me to follow Nick Saban at Alabama. And just because, even just without giving Saban his due, it's harder to win now. There's 12 teams in the playoffs. Like there's NIL and transfer portal. So there's more parity in college football than ever. It's going to get harder and harder to win.
And just to throw another wrinkle on this conversation, not that he's completely out of the woods, but okay, you've got, Alabama. Oh, guess what? They're opening up at Florida State. So there's another program that it's like, okay, you want to talk about high expectations, so it's like for week 1, again, I think it's tremendous at Ohio State and Texas. That's a tremendous way to start the brand new season. But Alabama, Florida State's going to have a lot of subplots. Florida State's coming off a tremendously disappointing season, and then Alabama, I wouldn't say that it was, a bad season, but it was disappointing by Alabama standards.
Yeah, no question. It's not the year anyone at Alabama wanted to have. It's not Kalen DeBoer's system or guys that he recruited for system yet. I'm willing to give him I like Kalen DeBoer. I think what he did was borderline insane following Saban, but I like him. I think he's a good coach, and I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly he can get this thing back on track. And because there's really no excuse, even this year, there wasn't much excuse to miss the playoffs with that roster.
I would agree with that.
That should have been a playoff team. And so, we'll see how he bounces back and if he can build this thing back. But that'll be a big storyline in 2025 for sure. All right. We've recapped the championship. I'm sorry, lost my mic there for a second. We've recapped the championship game, and we have looked ahead at some early Vegas odds. We will be back here early next week. We'll be talking transfer portal. Probably start taking a look at some roster shakeups and movement around the conference, and start looking into what's going on, like going into spring ball, maybe some big storylines. Because believe it or not, we're like 6 weeks away from spring ball starting. It's not going to be a long off season, so we'll try and bridge that gap the best we can. But thanks again, Chip, for joining me. Thanks again for watching and listening, and we will talk to you guys again here in a few days.
Take care.